We're waiting to have him come in. Good morning, Commissioner.
Good morning. Thank you all.
Oh, we can't hear you.
Morning.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Now we can hear you.
Okay, great.
Okay, everybody ready?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to call to order the Yamaha County Board of Commissioners formal informal session for June 9th, 2022. It is 10:01 in the morning. And Christian, would you lead us in the flag salute, please?
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, that brings us to our calendar session. Commissioners, do we have anything to add to the joint calendar?
No.
Commissioner Kula, anything?
Yeah, Chair, I just have one thing, and that you are welcome. I have invited State Senator Casey Jama for a tour of the county. He had requested a kind of a joint reciprocity, urban to rural, and I wanted to extend the invitation to the two of you and maybe to get it onto the calendar. It's Friday, July 1st from 10 to noon, and we'll start in Newburgh. So you're invited. I wanted to get it on the calendar, and I will send you a proposed agenda if you all would like to add anything to it.
Great, thank you. So that was Friday, July 1st from 10 to noon. Okay, if there's nothing, can anything for the calendar? No. Okay. Item D is public comment. This time period is reserved for public comment on any topic other than an agenda item, a quasi-judicial business matter, or a topic scheduled for a public hearing. Do we have any public comment that is not related to an agenda item? Okay, not seeing anybody in the virtual audience either. And just to note, we did receive some written public comment regarding the term limit ordinance for the public hearing today. Item E is department updates. We have no updates today. And item F is a work session, and we do have a work session on the books. It is the review and discussion of the Lafayette urban renewal plan. And I believe we are being joined by, is it Elaine Powder? Okay.
And we have Preston and the mayor joining us.
Great. So welcome. If you want to come on up to the 2 seats here. And if you could just state your name and address for the record, we would appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, good morning. I am Preston Polacic, the city administrator for Lafayette. And with me is Mayor Marie Sproul.
Welcome.
Welcome. Thanks for joining us in person. We appreciate it.
No problem.
Okay, so we have a packet in front of us. If you want to just run through that, that would be wonderful.
Thank you. Good morning, commissioners. Hi, Mary.
Hi, Preston. Nice to see you.
Casey, how you doing? All right.
Hi, Preston. Good to see you.
Yes, and so wanted to mention that we really appreciated the county's leadership in terms of economic development, working with SEDCOR on our behalf, and then specifically, the county has granted money to the city of Lafayette for facade improvements downtown. We were able to commingle city, county, and a grant from Recology to provide a facade program to assist businesses. We've given 2 grants out on that. One is still in progress, but that was a wonderful assistance from the county. And then in addition, the county has helped us with our soft costs to build a second reservoir, which is another very vital economic development piece of infrastructure to allow us to continue the build out of our UGB. And so those have been very important economic development initiatives on the city, which the county has been very gracious to support. And so this is the next big effort of economic development to direct toward our downtown through an urban renewal district. And so I want to, at this point, just hand the baton to Marie and have her tell us a little bit about the urban renewal.
Lafayette is in the last years have spent a lot of time on a new fire station and water systems and getting everything up so that we can supply the basic services. Well, now it's time for us to do what the citizens have been asking for, is to update the downtown area. The downtown area is in need of a lot of facade work. It's in need of a lot of blight, removal, and it's just needed basic stuff that hasn't been done. And an urban renewal district is the only way that we have been able to figure out to finance it. Working, business recruitment, all of this stuff is going into this urban renewal district. We've surveyed the citizens and they're absolutely ecstatic about it. We had a survey and we had a lot of responses and a lot of good ideas of which we've incorporated into the urban renewal district. Everybody from the council on down is all excited about this because, to be honest with you, our city needs a facelift. And being on 99 and a main thoroughfare, it also represents when the county, when people drive through and they see a town that's not quite up to state, so it reflects on the county and it reflects on everybody. And it's time for us to do that now. And that's why we're here today. And what I would like to do now is introduce Elaine Howard, who is our Urban Renewal District consultant, and she's going to go through the packet that you have in front of you. Hey, Elaine.
Welcome, Elaine.
Hi,
Thank
Elaine.
you. Good morning. I am bringing up the slideshow, so it will be on your monitor. So my name is, it should be coming up soon.
Yes, we can see it. Thank you.
Great, thank you. My name is Elaine Howard. I've been working with the city of Lafayette for the last year and a half, going on 2 years, to try to address problems within their downtown area. I've been working on this project with Nick Popenick of Tiberius Solutions, who does all of the financial analysis on our joint team. What I will go through today is just what the boundary is, what the proposed maximum indebtedness is, the project categories, the financial input, tax, what public input has happened, and what the next steps are. So in Lafayette, the needs for improvements within their city are basically blight removal. And if you've driven in downtown Lafayette, you can see what we're talking about. There are a lot of buildings that are in disrepair. There is a lot of just suburban blight around those buildings. And the city does not have the amount of funds they need to improve the downtown, to incentivize new business to come in, to improve the utility systems, and are looking to urban renewal to help them bridge that gap to help rejuvenate the city. The boundary of the area, as you can see, is fairly small and very compact, and it is the downtown core, reaching down to the park and to an undeveloped property in the southeast area of Lafayette that the city is hoping will redevelop, which would also actually be the increment that would allow this area to work. The estimated total net tax increment finance dollars over a 30-year time period would be $22,900,000. The maximum indebtedness for the plan is projected at $19,600,000. The capacity when we first did this was 2021 dollars, is $11,800,000 for projects. As in most urban renewal areas, that funding comes in very slowly at the beginning because it's just predicated upon the 3% increase in assessed value growth within the area. So in years 1 through 5, there's only estimated to be about $500,000 worth of funding. The funding goes up as the area is around and hopefully able to do projects and to have that new development occur. So the funding then increases in years 6 through 10, 11 through 15. This finance plan was written so that in year 20, a bond could be issued that would allow for financing through the last year of the plan, which would be year 30. The projects categories that the city council has identified, and as the mayor indicated, we did have significant response to a survey on the website. Much better response than we're ever able to get in an in-person open house, where you usually get anywhere from 5 to 15 people. The survey response had approximately 130 responses. So that for a city the size of Lafayette on this, that was a very good amount of public input. And as the mayor indicated, it was substantially very positive input and excitement about the ability to help the city of Lafayette foster new economic development. The categories were then identified as business development assistance, helping improve some blighting conditions in the housing sector, to improve the city identity, to provide infrastructure, to do development and redevelopment, and administration. This is the dollars that were allocated to the different projects. You can see the constant 2022 cost of those dollars and then the year of expenditure cost. That cost obviously is higher because of inflation over the time period of the ability to spend the money. So the business development assistance would be $375,000. The housing assistance, the city really decided what they wanted to do was to remove blight. And so that's a very humble amount of money towards that, but would allow them to remove some blight within the area. City identity is a little over $2 million. That would include signage, welcome signs, business signs, wayfinding, community board, streetscape, sidewalks, pedestrian safety upgrades, connections to Terry Park, an e-vehicle charging station, and then other park improvements. Infrastructure is $9 million. So infrastructure is the biggest component of the costs within the urban renewal plan. And infrastructure is usually what will help facilitate new development. So that includes upgrades of the water, sewer, and storm systems, extending water and sewer across Highway 99 to the industrial property, looping utility systems, public restrooms, a parking lot that could include that EV charging station, pedestrian crossing at Bridge Street, auto bicycle parking, rebuilding the side streets in the urban renewal area, and burying overhead utility lines. Development, redevelopment is, again, a fairly small amount, but it's trying to work with private entities for development within the urban renewal area at $50,000. And then administration and planning over the 30-year lifetime of the area at $215,000. The impacts to the Yamhill County and Yamhill County Extension Service are shown on this slide. The total impact to the county over the 3 years is projected at $5,221,375, and to the county extension service, $90,956. And again, you can see those impacts start out really small in the beginning. They increase over the life of the area, and your budget also increases over the life of the area. The public input on this project to date, there was a feasibility study done in 2021, that there was a briefing to the city council on that, an open public briefing where citizens are always invited. There are meetings with the city council on January 14th, July 15th, October 14th, July 13th, February 10th, and March 10th. The project survey was posted on the website from mid-February through March 31st. So 6 weeks on the website, and the city did a great job of sending out information to their constituents to ask them to respond on the website. The agency meeting was on May 12th. We have our county briefing today. The Planning Commission will have a meeting on June 16th. The City Council public hearing will be on July 14th. There will be an article in the city-wide newspaper and notices in all of the utility bills. The survey input on the projects was in this order: blight removal, support for blight removal, rebuilding the side streets, storefront programs, bearing overhead lines, street furniture, bike parking, encouraging private development, and the Bridge Street safety improvements. Again, those next steps for this plan would be a planning commission meeting June 16th, the city council hearing July 14th. On August 11th, there would be another hearing and vote by the city council on potential adoption of the plan. So we do not need any action from the county. The city is required to give the county a briefing, including going over what the maximum indebtedness is proposed. And I think Preston and the mayor look forward to any input that you would have on their plan.
Thank you, Elaine. I do have a question about the cost to the city. I don't see that included in here.
I did not include that because, but I can give that to you easily. Let me pull up my report. In the packet that you were sent, that information is all included, and I'm trying to get my report to get to that point. The impact to the city of Lafayette is the highest impact to any taxing district, and it is a little over $7 million.
Thank you.
And Elaine, if I could jump in, when we say impact, these are the tax increment funds that go into the projects. And if you have a successful urban renewal, then these properties go back on the tax rolls when the urban renewal is complete. And the way this investment goes with a successful urban renewal, those properties are go back onto the tax roll at a higher rate than it would have if you didn't do anything. Because as the investment occurs, values go up. So it's in the long run, taxing jurisdictions can benefit from urban renewal. And that's the promise of every urban renewal agency that's out there, and ours is no different.
Thank you. I think the key word is if they're successful. And so far, I've been studying urban renewal for about 12 years. So far, I have not seen an urban renewal district that has been actually successful and produced what it said it was going to produce. This looks like it's for year one, maybe, because it doesn't show the total over the life of the span of the project. So I have a couple questions. The majority of these projects, look like they are what I would consider city functions. So if you look at, city identity is quite a bit of money there, infrastructure for sure, water, sewer, storm, all of those kinds of things, pedestrian crossing. So is there a reason that the city has not sought, a bond or a levy to pay for those kinds of improvements?
Well, Commissioner Bershauer, we have obtained several grants over the last 12 years to improve downtown. And then we've made investments. We've partnered with ODOT to do a complete rebuild of the highway through the town. So we've invested literally millions into downtown. There's a lot more work that needs to be done. So there's the timing was right for an urban renewal district at the time where we conducted an urban renewal study in a feasibility study in 2020. It's great timing for that. The timing's right for a district, and there's just this is the typical way to pool monies in order to obtain the financing for the rest of the improvements that we want to see downtown.
Thank you. I'm concerned about the timing because we are looking at some very alarming economic indicators coming in future years. The talk now is of a worldwide recession. And so when you look at the impact that an urban renewal district has on other taxing districts, the county, a total cost of potentially $5 million, that's a lot of money for us.
That's over 30 years. That's not something that's going to happen
Yes.
right away.
Right.
It's not something that's going to happen tomorrow or the next day. It's over time.
Right, but we've noticed that these kinds of impacts, when you layer them over time, they do have a significant impact. The extension service, while it looks like it's under $100,000, we just had that budget discussion, and the comments coming from them is that they're shrinking, their budgets are shrinking and shrinking and shrinking over time. So, and they unfortunately are subject to all of these urban renewal districts, including Newburgh's, latest proposed one, and several others in our county. So that's a concern for me. A $7 million cost to the city is a huge cost. You guys have fire service that you're providing. You have, I believe you pay for 2 sheriff's deputies, which is actually a lot for a small city like Lafayette. So I'm concerned about how you will absorb the impact of that cost, especially as you're adding new housing developments. I think it's towards the north end of your city. Those are more residential homes that you are going to have to serve, which means, a greater impact to your service agencies like the fire department. And we've had this discussion in other proposed urban renewal zones that have separate special districts for fire. The impact to the fire district is considerable. Wilsonville's urban renewal plan cost TVF&R over $1 million a year in lost revenue and tax revenue. So it will have an impact to city services. I'm just not sure, if your residents are in support of improving downtown and improving infrastructure, why not ask them for the money to do so? Why not go out for a bond and say, here's what we're going to do. We're going to improve X, Y, and Z, and do it that way rather than kind of slowly bleeding out your city services and your city budget with this plan.
Well, let me jump in then on that. The urban renewal does not raise the taxes on residents. It's the increment of investment into the district. So if there is no investment and property values go up, like in a recession, then you don't have those urban renewal revenues. You don't have those resources to conduct those activities and invest in infrastructure. So if the investment doesn't occur in our urban renewal area, those funds are not there to help do these projects. What you're suggesting is that we go out and tax folks, and this plan does not increase taxes. It utilizes taxes that are already coming in for this district, and then those are dedicated toward, the increment is dedicated toward the projects that you see on the list. Elaine, you want to add to that?
No, I don't have anything to add. I mean, the question really is why not do a general obligation bond? And I think the answer is the city council has decided urban renewal is the path that they are wanting to pursue.
Right, thank you. I guess my question is that if the bulk of the projects that are involved in this list are city projects, they are the city's responsibility to do infrastructure, road improvement, bridge improvement, pedestrian improvement. Why do this instead of going in front of your taxpayers and saying, you know, we really need to upgrade here. We need to invest in that, rather than kind of couching it as an economic development tool? Because I guess my next question is, why hasn't private development voluntarily through the free market come into Lafayette and actually developed?
You know, that's a question that all of us have talked about for a long time. And a lot of it is the access to the buildings and the parking and the different things like that, that it's not available in other cities. We're a very compact city. We have very little room to grow for a lot of different things. Bigger businesses and stuff like that. We don't have the land in the city to do that. Now you're talking about a recession in the long run, but then you're asking us to go out for a bond, which is going to tax the citizens more when we're going into a recession. To me, that seems a little bit backward.
Well, I'm not asking you to go for a bond.
No, what you're suggesting, I'm sorry.
I personally feel that urban renewal is dishonest. If you tell taxpayers that it's not going to raise their taxes, you're being dishonest in a way, because you're basically saying that if not for urban renewal, there would be no improvements, there would be no development or economic activity happening in that zone. And that's simply not true. But what the next step is, taxpayers often don't understand that they're going to have to end up paying for the loss of revenue over time, because the fire department has to continue to service those people, plus the additional residents that are coming in. So I feel that urban renewal has been used and abused in Oregon, especially since we have not seen the economic development and the actual return on investment. I have sat through many TVF&R board meetings where they just are frustrated because they agree to do this stuff and then there's no return on investment. So I'm just cautioning. And I think that, you know, if the taxpayers in your city are truly interested in improving infrastructure and doing all those improvements, why not be upfront about that and say, okay, here's what it's going to cost us. Are you on board to do that? Rather than sort of having this shell game of urban renewal where they don't really know where the money's coming from, but it's actually still coming out of their pockets. That's my frustration with it.
Chair, I just wanted to, since I didn't want you to forget about me, I've been raising my hand.
Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner.
No, I'm not following your logic, Chair, and so I wanted to just ask if I could hear a little bit more from you, Chair, about what you mean. And so my first question is, can you give me examples of, because you said this is the urban renewal area proposal will fund, your clarification was it'll fund city responsibility work. Can you give me an example of work that that would be that you think would be appropriate that wouldn't be city responsibility work that you think an urban renewal district could fund? And then the other question I have for you is, can you give me examples of properties around the county that haven't had public investment that have been developed by private entities? I'm just thinking of the shovel ready program. So because
can-
I'm not tracking, sorry, thank you.
when I talk about what is slated to be funded here, we're talking about, you know, signage and community boards and streetscape sidewalks and pedestrian upgrades, water, sewer, storm upgrades. All of that is what I would consider city functions, right? I pay for that in my city through city taxes. And oops, I hit my microphone. Am I still on? Okay, it's going in now. Okay. And my point is that urban renewal it's not just a simple, you know, we'll pay for it over time and it doesn't increase your taxes. All of the taxing districts pay for this. The county taxpayers are going to pay for this based on the structure. So that is my frustration. And the reason why is that we hardly ever see return on investment. We've seen this in the Portland Urban Renewal Agency where they did an urban renewal district and they promised a bunch of new housing. It never came to fruition. Wilsonville's urban renewal district had large industry like Solar World in some places that came in and made all these promises and then they left and they went out of business. So there's an ongoing frustration that is kind of proven out over time that this tool is not effective because there's no return on investment. And it's easy to sell it because you're saying, well, it's not going to increase your taxes, and yet we're going to do all this activity. And even in a recession, if there is no increase in property value, you're still paying for the administration of the taxing agency, the urban renewal agency. So you have overhead costs regardless of whether or not you're actually producing anything that you said you're going to produce.
Okay, so your clarification then is that you don't believe that there's anything that's appropriate for urban renewal districts to pay for. Is that for cities? Is that what I'm hearing?
Urban renewal has not been proven out as an effective tool over the past 12 years that I've been watching urban renewal districts.
Okay, got it. So it's not really a matter of whether the city, in your view, whether the city is proposing to fund different things than what you would think are appropriate. It's a matter of that you don't think any of it's appropriate.
What I'm saying is that when a city or municipality says we can use urban renewal to remove blight, I think the term blight and the concept of blight has shifted over time, right? Wilsonville is not blighted, and yet that was sold as a tool in Wilsonville. And that is sort of morphed into simply just a government taxing tool where, you know, the argument is, if not for urban renewal, we wouldn't have economic development. We wouldn't have private investors coming in here. And my question is, well, why is that, right? In the discussion about Newburgh's, we had a very heated discussion about why private developers aren't developing in Newburgh. And we have a different view, right? It's SDC fees and it's all of these other things that aren't in our control. And yet the county taxpayers are on the hook for paying for part of this, as well as the extension district and city and other city functions. So I encourage a more open and transparent dialogue about what this really means, because it will have an impact over time, obviously, to the county and to other city functions.
And then, Chair, if I may,
the return on investment for this type of tool.
Chair, I wanted to follow up then your comments about if private investment needs public funding, that you don't like that, and why are they not investing on their own already? And I at least seem to recall that the state's shovel-ready property program requires it to be shovel-ready, right? And then industrial, for example, because I believe this land is zoned industrial, the large parcel, that parcel could then be developed and much more likely to be developed. And I'm wondering if you can give me an examples of industrial properties that didn't have infrastructure and that got developed purely with private dollars?
I don't have an example, Commissioner, off the top of my head. There are plenty of public-private partnerships that we're talking about urban renewal as a government tool. And that's what's in front of us. Commissioner Starrett?
Chair, thank you. And I want to thank you, Preston and Mayor and Elaine, for the information. I had a couple of things when I first looked at this. The first thing that came to mind was I am skeptical of urban renewal only because, you know, I come from Brooklyn and I watched urban renewal there and what it did, and it was not a good thing. And I'll leave it there. It gentrified neighborhoods and it took existing neighborhoods that were lively, although they were low income, and they destroyed them and destroyed the communities there. So I come to that with that jaundiced perspective. What I do look at is some of the concerns when we look at when we tell people this isn't going to increase your taxes, when we see that the bottom line and the net impact to Yamaha County is $5 million and $90,000 to Yamaha County Extension. We just had a budget meeting for the Extension Service, and they talked about their how their budget was constricted and how it was impacting them. And then I look at the county. I also look at there is a forecasted wave of foreclosures coming based on not only a severe recession, but something that would even mimic a depression. We as a county are responsible, the fiduciary responsibility is to make sure that the county services are supported and are whole. We're already seeing an impact to our budget based on this significant increase in personnel costs, which are really hitting us hard. So factoring that in, factoring with every CBA we have to look ahead to years of increased personnel costs. We also have to look at, again, to be wise, to look ahead at what the forecast is regarding the economy. So not only it's going to cost us more to do business, it's going to perhaps restrict our budget because we don't have the property taxes. And remember, about 70% of that check that people write comes to the county. So looking at that, and then I also look at the sort of the bigger hypothetical. What if all of the 10 cities in Yamaha County said, we're going to do an urban renewal project? That's 10 cities times whatever the impact is going forward over the years. So in other words, every city would come to us with one. And this is just a, confer and basically let us know what your plan is that we really have no say in this other to say that this is going to significantly impact the county. And it does impact the taxpayers because it's that much less we have to spend. So with a budget our size, I look at these types of things and I love the idea of what you'd want to do, because I drive through probably 3-4 times a week and I think it could be cute if this happened and if you had this going on and this was cleaned up, and I've done all that. But a couple of things come to mind: housing conditions. How do we, it's a subjective term, how do we determine that the condition of the house is something we want to address? I know that the county just gave to the housing authority a property in Lafayette that they were able to, mitigate some of what it looked like, and to be able to address that way. So there's that. But how do you make the value judgment that someone's house needs to be changed in terms of the appearance? And then what does removing blight mean? Because somebody who has a storefront that is not considered, appealing, how do you say we're going to come in and suggest that you change that? So these are just my concerns, because my job here is to keep an eye on the money that we are going to need going forward. And the reason why we've been able to be in such good financial shape over the years when other counties have had to cut core services like sheriff's patrols and jails and things, and public health, is because we have had a very conservative approach to budgeting. So I'll just leave that there. Well, I love the idea of what you want to do. ultimately, we're responsible for what this will mean to our budget.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Kula, did you have any follow-up questions?
Chair, I will say that I appreciate the City of Lafayette's work on this. I thought that the document, both the summary and the more detailed version, had a lot of the information, the answered questions I had about how this was going to work and kind of where it fits in the overall work that the City of Lafayette has done and is doing on economic development. I know clearly this is one piece of the puzzle here. And I'm really grateful that the City Council listened to all the input from the city residents and said, okay, this is the path that we hear is the best one forward. And I will say that I look forward to working with you all on perhaps transferring a piece of land that is county-owned property to benefit that, right? Because it fits into your city's work, and we didn't know we owned it. So thank you for that presentation, and thanks for the opportunity, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. And do you have a copy of that survey? I wonder if we could get a copy of the survey that was given to the public. Or even if it's just emailed, that would be fine.
We have a summary of it, and I can make sure Preston has the latest summary, and that can certainly be emailed to you.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. And then I would be remiss if I didn't mention a public vote. So as we were going through this process with Newburgh and having the discussions, ultimately we decided that we would be in support so long as the public weighed in and had a chance to vote on the plan. So that's highly suggested. I always encourage public votes on this kind of stuff so you have full buy-in. So I wanted to mention that as well. Any further questions, commissioners?
I just had a question about the housing conditions. Can you be more specific on what funding would do and who would be the recipient of that funding?
Let me review the statement on that.
And then just the removing blight component, what that actually specifically would entail.
What we had envisioned on removing the blight is if we have a piece of land that is in the urban area that would be good for a business or something of that nature, the city would help them remove what's there. So then they would buy the land and build, but the portion for the city would be just the removal of the blight. It's just an added feature that would get more businesses to come in. Because if you've ever been through our city, I know you've been through the line, but you've never ridden through the two streets that parallel 99. And there's a lot of, in fact, one of our businesses is doing that right now. We had a couple, 3 houses that were just horrible. They bought the land and they were removing them, and then they're going to extend their business and stuff like that.
Okay.
You know, another thing that you have to look at, you're talking about impacting you. You know, we have a subdivision going in there of 244 homes. It's going to impact the tax base for the county a lot. If we take these pieces of property right now and get them to, you know, clean up and put businesses on, that's only going to increase your pocket because of the taxes is going up. So it's a give and take thing about that, about affecting your budget and us giving money back. So everything that we do as far as those businesses and those lots and that type of stuff is going to benefit you as well as it does us.
Good point. Thank you. And just so the housing conditions, those are existing homes that would need some remediation?
Yes.
Correct. And also our downtown commercial zoning and development standards are encouraged mixed use, commercial on the bottom and residential on top. And so it's not really a matter of improving certain residential or business necessarily. It's providing the best density, the best investment really are those mixed uses. And sometimes it makes From a planning sense, you have to commingle properties and provide incentives to do that, which urban renewal can do.
Thank you for the information. Appreciate it.
Was there city investment in the new housing neighborhood, the new development?
The new subdivision that Mayor Sproul spoke of, that's a straight up subdivision where we do have SDCs and they invest. We've extended some services, but there's nothing out of the ordinary, really. When it's all said and done, that infrastructure is all supported in perpetuity by the city.
Right, okay, so
And
private
services.
investor came in, bought the land and is building the homes.
Correct.
Thank you.
And were you able, I believe you did either reduce or forgive the SDCs on the housing authority property?
No.
Well, we didn't reduce the SDCs because we didn't want to set a precedent. We gave them a $10,000 grant.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I appreciate you doing that.
Yes.
Okay, well, we certainly know that Lafayette has struggled in the past few years now with COVID, and also the ODOT
Mhm.
project, for sure. Those Main Street businesses have taken a hit. So we hear you about that concern, absolutely.
Thank you.
And we thank you for your presentation. And Elaine, thank you very much.
Thanks, Elaine. Thank you, Mayor. Thanks, Preston. Good to
Thank
see
you.
you both.
Thank you.
Okay, so we are now on item G, which is our consent agenda. We have no business. Item H is old business. We have none. Let's see. Item I is other business. I1 is consideration of approval of an amendment to the master subscription agreement between Yamaha County Health and Human Services and Reliance Learning, Board Order 17-288. For an additional annual increase in the amount of, is that 2 million? 2,442,000, no.
1,000, 2,000.
Okay, I'm saying a period and a comma. $2,442.84 effective August 1st of 2022. Do I have a motion to approve?
Chair, so moved.
And Commissioner Starrett moves approval. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed, same sign. Thank you. Motion passes. Item I2, consideration of the membership position appointments to the Local Public Safety Coordinating Council, or LPSC, each for a term to expire June 30th of 2024. And this is involving Lindsay Manfred, our Health and Human Services Public Health Director, and Jason Hennis, the Health and Human Services Mental Health Director. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved, Chair.
Commissioner Starrett moves approval. Is there further discussion? Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Item 3, consideration of approval of the vendor selection of Nelson Nygard as recommended by the Yamaha County Transit Manager to complete phase 1 and 2 of the bus stop installation project. And it looks like we do have Cynthia here in the audience if there are any questions, commissioners. Otherwise, do I have a motion to approve?
Madam Chair, if I could.
Okay.
In looking through the packet, and Cynthia can correct me if I'm mistaken, it appears that what she's asking for is for the board to approve the vendor selection and also authorize staff and county council to finalize the agreement not to exceed $120,000. So I believe what she's asking is for the board to authorize the vendor and approve the contract so that we don't need to bring the contract back again before the board at a later date. If that's correct, Cynthia, then I would just suggest that the motion and the vote take that into consideration to approve the vendor and authorize county council to finalize the professional services agreement.
Okay. So commissioners, I will move that we approve the vendor selection of Nelson Nygard to complete phase 1 and 2 of the bus stop installation and authorize county council to finalize the professional services agreement. Is there further discussion?
I would just add a note, Chair, that I really appreciate the work of Cynthia on this and keeping it moving forward. It's an important part of the bigger plan.
Thank you. Okay, no further discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed, same sign. Thank you. Motion passes. Item I4, consideration of approval to declare bus number 401 as surplus and authorize staff to dispose of via auction per county policy and reinstate buses numbers 1302 and 1307 to active fleet status. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Commissioner Sterrett moves approval. Is there further discussion or any questions? Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Sorry. All opposed, same sign. Okay, motion passes. Thank you. Item I5, consideration of accepting the recommendation of the Ambulance Service Area ASA Committee to accept the quote received from Cambridge Consulting Group in the amount of $37,900 to update the Yamaha County Ambulance Service Area ASA plan.
Chair, I would move approval and just say I appreciate the work of the subcommittee and the ASA committee because this is certainly something that's been needed to be done, and we did get a nice, a very well-qualified group, so.
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay, Commissioner Sterrett moves approval. Commissioner Kula, any further discussion or questions?
No, Chair.
Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed, same sign. Thank you. Motion passes. Okay, that brings us to item J, which is our public hearing. I'm going to open the public hearing. This is not a continuation of last one, right? Because we are discussing a different overall topic. So this public hearing is to receive public comment on repealing Ordinance 587, which provides term limits for elective county offices. And we did receive quite a bit of written testimony. So I want to acknowledge that and that we have reviewed the written testimony. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to offer testimony in favor or in opposition of this ordinance? Anyone in the virtual audience can please raise your hand.
Chair, the sheriff is here, and I know you didn't specifically request speaking, but I think it would be instructive for us to just get a short update on why, in this particular case, you would be in favor of, or perhaps not in favor of, but what your position would be and how it would impact the office of the sheriff. Sorry to put you on the spot, but you did.
You spoke a little bit about it a
You
couple weeks
you
ago, but
did,
yeah.
but
Yeah,
just,
I would-
you know,
I would just reiterate the same thing I had said before, is that, when you are put in a position where you have a very qualified, capable candidate to fill the role, if you push an individual out of that office and with the uncertainty of who would be the most qualified next person to step in. And so because you force a good quality candidate down the road, you're giving the voters an option to pick possibly a lesser qualified candidate. So my concept is the position has already got a term limit on it. If the citizens don't want that individual to fill that position anymore, then they can vote another person into that position. But it should be allowed for that good quality candidate to be able to continue forward. And if the citizens still want that person representing them, then they can vote them in.
thank you, Sheriff. I think it's important. We did get a lot of public testimony, and just for the record, I really appreciate the input from people who, because we asked for input and folks gave us, those who gave us reasoned, really well thought out examples of why they were for or against this particular issue. It was very helpful. Those who sent emails that were pretty much with misinformation, like in other words, that we were just going to, there would be no more election for a sheriff. You would just basically be the sheriff in perpetuity, or the county commissioners would be basically just holding hostage the office of the board. So there was a lot of misinformation. But you pointed out that this still is an elective office, and that the candidate or the incumbent would still be on the ballot. So it's not like you would basically be taking over your office for life.
Correct. Yeah, I would still have to apply or file to run. If there are other individuals in the community that want to do the job and feel they can do it better, they have the option to file as well. I think the key is typically what you have is if you have an uncontested election, for example, and no one throws their name in the hat, you could be in a position where you have someone who is term limited out and you have no other qualified individuals to do that position. And I still think that it's important for the citizens to have that voice. This position still has to be an elected position. I just think that there is a reason why there are no other counties that do something similar to this.
There are two
There are
more.
two.
That was my mistake. Yeah, I gave incorrect information to the board and probably to you previously. I was under the understanding that there weren't any other counties with term limits ordinances on the books. There are two. Multnomah County is one. They are a home rule county.
And I
And
should
Union
note that's
County
in
is the
their
other one.
charter.
Right.
Not an ordinance, but in their charter.
In their charter, yeah.
And then Union County is a general law county, and they also adopted theirs, I think, in 2017,
Before the court case.
before the court case.
Mhm.
And their ordinance is similar to ours in that it limits, I believe it's only county commissioners to 2 terms.
Okay.
And I'm just gonna jump in, sorry. I can't hear Christian, and I feel like it's important for me to hear him. You were cutting in and out, that's all.
Oh, you want me to? Okay, I was mistaken previously when I told the board, and I think I mentioned it to Tim and to Derek as well, that there weren't any other counties that had term limits either in the charter or in ordinance. Multnomah County has one in their charter. Union County has one. The Union County ordinance was adopted in 2017 before the most recent Court of Appeals decision. Multnomah County is a home rule county. Union County is general law county, like Yamhill County. And so I believe their ordinance would face the same questions potentially as ours. So there are those 2 counties. We did after we learned that, we did ask other county councils around the state just to make sure. And I don't believe we heard back from anyone else that there were.
That's correct. I heard from most other county councils that they don't have one. I didn't hear of any other counties that have one outside of Union.
I can also add that the Douglas County ordinance, as far as I can tell, is still on the books, but that is the ordinance that was addressed in the Height case back
Actually,
in 2018.
I heard from Douglas
been
County that
repealed?
they no longer have one.
Okay, because when I looked at their website,
Okay,
it still appeared as if it was on the books, but maybe they repealed it.
I
okay,
can-
so that's interesting. We,
Excuse me, I heard from Paul Meyer on Monday. Said that they do not have term limits in Douglas. He said, quote, "not in Douglas." period.
Okay.
He's Douglas County Council. So I don't know, maybe their website is outdated.
okay, thank you, Sheriff.
you,
So
Sheriff.
we had kind of an interesting mix of public comment come through, either written or maybe on Facebook or whatever. A lot of support for repealing or removing the 4 positions that we've discussed before from the ordinance. A lot of comment about keeping commissioners in. Some thoughts on perhaps a conflict of interest that we are debating this ourselves, and yet we're discussing our own positions. One of the suggestions was to remove everyone, but for commissioners, essentially make it for future commissioners. So I don't really see how that's different legally in terms of, you know, if we do that, we're still sort of in a legal question. If we say the current commissioners are subject to 3 terms, but any future commissioners and anyone else is not.
I think you'd face the same legal question if one of the current commissioners decided to challenge the ordinance.
Right.
That's right.
I just want to get
Yeah.
that on record.
Yeah.
I would say probably the least amount of public testimony came in for repealing everyone out of it, or repealing the whole thing, removing everyone. And then we had quite a few folks say to leave it as it is, because this is how voters have spoken twice and they support term limits. And I think there was a lot of misinformation out there in terms of who or why this was brought forward. And I was hoping to work to correct some of that. But I think that it seems to me, and commissioners, you can correct me if I'm off here, but it seems to me like the consensus, the majority consensus, was to remove the 4 positions that we consider more of the technical positions and keep the commissioners in the ordinance. Is that your feeling, Commissioner Gould? We'll start with you.
Oh, yeah, Chair. I just wanted to make sure. So I see, I can see through the presenter camera that we also have Assessor Tax Collector. And I saw him sign in. Did he want to provide any further testimony? And also, are we still in a hearing? So I just wanted to make sure we were in those.
We are still in the hearing. So Derek, did you want to offer additional? Okay, yeah, you spoke quite a bit last time, so yeah. Okay.
Okay, great. Yes, and then I wanted to ask Commissioner Sherritt. I didn't see any place in the testimony that we received through the emails, so the public comment to the BOC info, or that came to us as the 3 of us, that presented this as making elected officials for life. I did see some that, so I'm not sure, maybe I just need to see those. I did see a few, maybe one that suggested that we were proposing that these be made into appointed positions. And as far as I know, none of us, and the assessor as well, has not proposed that.
Commissioner, one of the ones that I'm referencing is someone who accused the commissioners, I'll just leave it there, of wanting to create a monarchy, which not only is absurd on the very definition of what a monarchy is, but the very concept of the fact that this was something one of the commissioners brought to us. This was brought to us by our other elected officials, which are the assessor, the sheriff, and we have a situation where our clerk has resigned, presumably as a result of the limitations on tenure. So there have been a number of, like I said, vitriolic emails accusing us of wanting to stay in power through the power of incumbency. And all I'm saying is that we need to just define our terms and see what we're all really here about. And so we, again, we have a couple of options. Do we remove those highly technical elected positions and keep the commissioners on there, which again leaves us open to the liability that Colton has outlined for us under ORS Chapter 34? Or do we just leave it as is and wait for someone to challenge it? Or do we just, again, put it before the voters? They've made their opinions clear. I've always been in favor of term limits. But then again, the more you look into it, each election is a term limit. If someone doesn't want you to be in office, they won't re-elect you. This is my position.
I'm sorry. Thank you. That's helpful in the context of your previous comments. I appreciate it. So Chair, then to your point, if we're in deliberations, as it were, considering the request that's before us from the Assessor Tax Collector as presented by him, and I know with a lot of conversations beforehand, Christian and I have talked about term limits in the context of charter reviews or a charter anyway, well before this, that considering that this is something that was voted on by voters in the county, it feels to me like it should go to the voters as a ballot referral from the Board of Commissioners. That's a proposal to repeal the ordinance in its entirety. That would be where I guess I'm coming down on it. And then I would say that on the flip side, if it's not, if in our best argument for why it should be repealed because of the perceived or likely unconstitutionality, and because of the value of these public servants with highly technical skills, for example. So there at least two strong arguments there that it would then face it would likely face a challenge if it wasn't successfully repealed by voters. So that's the kind of how I'm seeing it right now. And I really appreciate, as Commissioner Starrett, I think, suggested, a lot of nuance in the public comment around this. So I really appreciate that. And this is what I see as, in my view, the best path going forward, is to present it as a proposal from the Board of Commissioners for a vote.
So, Madam
Thank you,
Chair, if I
Commissioner.
could just suggest, if you're done hearing testimony or discussing the written testimony that was received, which I think was an appropriate conversation, if there is no more testimony or discussion around specific written testimony, close the hearing and then go into further discussion and deliberation. And just to remind the board, you don't need to take any specific action coming out of this public hearing. It was meant to receive input and then afford the commissioners an opportunity to discuss. If you're ready to make some decisions, you certainly can, but there is no requirement that you make or take some sort of formal action coming out of the public hearing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I will call for any final testimony in favor or against or neutral or anything. Anybody online, virtually? Okay, seeing none, I will close the public hearing and we can open it up for further deliberation. I'm wondering if, I support public votes 99.9% of the time. I do feel, though, that the public has voted on this twice and overwhelmingly supported term limits. So I wouldn't be surprised if they do again. My concern would be that whether they do or they don't, well, whether they do, the legality and the issues around the constitutionality of this still remain. So we're still back to square one. We've just simply reaffirmed that our voters like term limits. And number two, potentially the cost of doing that, right? And yet we're still back at square one. I'm also worried about misinformation given what came back to us through public comment. There was a lot of folks that just, didn't see the first discussion and weren't really aware of how this came forward or why. That's concerning to me that could potentially be part of the discussion on the vote. And that's not really helpful, right? We're trying to get to whether or not people acknowledge or understand that this could be unconstitutional and whether or not they would continue to support it. I wonder if it makes sense for us to ask, and I've brought this up with Christian a couple times, but should we be asking our court how they would weigh in on this in sort of a preemptive, manner? So we're not waiting to be sued, but we're actually sort of being proactive about it and asking our courts to weigh in and see whether they would come down with the same decision as is a height case.
Yeah.
And whether that would be useful. We could still take no action, or we could, take action as a result of whatever their opinion is.
Yeah.
But I'm just wondering if we had a local decision, if that would matter in any way
maybe to commissioners or to just the public at large?
So a couple of different concerns there. So we could do this through like a petition to the court for an opinion. If the question is the ordinance as currently written constitutional as it applies to commissioners or the other elected offices or all of the offices? I think that's one of the initial things we would want to determine. We have a binding appellate court opinion as to the constitutionality of the ordinance as it relates to commissioners. So I don't expect, I think I could say with a high degree of probability that our local court would come down with the same ruling. Might that be helpful? I guess it might be helpful to those folks who would find it helpful. It certainly wouldn't change our legal analysis or view of the current state of the law, which is a very similar ordinance with very similar restrictions in a general law county with the same restrictions or the same qualifications, was challenged. Circuit Court found it unconstitutional. That was upheld by the appellate court. It's a binding authority on our local circuit court. So I would not expect a different decision. As Colton and I have sort of tried to explain the nuance there, and this was covered a little bit in Colton's memo, we can talk some more about that. There is potentially a slightly different question as it relates to the qualifications for the assessor, I think, and the sheriff, with the language in the Constitution as provided under the law. I don't think we have, because the height decision was specific to county commissioners, we don't have a opinion as it relates to those other two elected offices. If you were interested in a local judicial decision on those two offices, then there might be some value in asking the court that question. But it sounded like the board might already be at a point of consensus around having other sound policy reasons why you would be in favor of removing those positions from the ordinance. So I think that sort of circles back to the question that I think it's important to keep in mind. Are you interested in preserving term limits for commissioners or any of the elected offices? If you are, and if you think you support that concept, then there could be some merit in asking the court for an opinion as it relates to sheriffs and assessors. I don't think we'd get a different decision as it relates to commissioners.
Right, so I think that's kind of what I'm getting at is that piece of information, that legal opinion by our court system is valuable because we're discussing not just the commissioners, we're discussing all of the other elected positions. And in the Height case, that was not specifically discussed. So in my mind, that would be a key piece of information to know whether or not our own court system supports our ordinance or not. Clearly, we're having that discussion about other things like the Second Amendment ordinance. So I'm just wondering if that's an appropriate next step rather than jumping to a ballot measure. Should we have that information before we ultimately say, we're going to put this on the ballot?
Chair, we have that information and we have it not only through a circuit court, albeit another county, but an appellate court.
Correct.
So that is not something that, because of the jurisdiction, would necessarily in the county boundary would necessarily change based on the ORS, based on the Constitution. But the other thing is the commissioners did remove one highly technical position, the surveyor. So I'm wondering in what capacity did they do that couldn't be done with the other highly technical
So there was a statutory change that said the surveyor was no longer required to be an elected position and it could be an appointed position. So that was a change in the law that allowed the board then to make that determination to remove that position from The term limits
at the
ordinance.
county level
Mhm.
because of the statute. Okay.
Correct.
All right. that
Right,
makes
but the
sense.
action thereby removed the term limits for that position because it's now appointed, correct?
Well, because it was no longer an
Not-
elected position. It's
Right.
it's appointed.
Right.
Not
And
elected.
there was two
Right.
actions with that. First, there was the term limits, and then the second part was it's no longer an elected position. So it wasn't removed from the term limits ordinance in.
No,
May.
by virtue of it being appointed,
R-
the
Right,
term limits ordinance no longer applied.
Mhm.
right.
So if we were to leave it alone, and then basically one of our electeds, our sheriff or our assessor, turns around and says, okay, I'm going to file, goes to the clerk's office, files, and then the filing is refused. And then we then have a court situation where we've got to pay your legal fees and ours to defend it because ostensibly we will lose.
And that reminds me of something else I wanted to mention. If we were to petition the court for an opinion as it related to assessors and sheriffs, that opinion wouldn't necessarily prevent, if it remained on the books, prevent then a official later from again challenging it. So you could potentially have the issue litigated twice. If that makes sense.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, I'm trying to get to a base level consensus. Let's start with commissioners. Is there a base level consensus that we are not interested in removing term limits for commissioners?
I would agree to that. I just don't know how we take commissioners out of the mix when it comes to the ordinance itself.
You would simply take action similar to the action that was taken when you removed surveyors, and you could, by a vote of the board, amend the ordinance so that it only applied to commissioners. Or you could refer that question to the voters. So those would be the two ways to address that.
Just to clarify, Christian, process-wise for modifying the ordinance as is, can that just be done by board order, or is that a require the first and second reading?
Yeah,
and the
we would have to
hearings
go through,
associated?
yeah, we'd have to
Okay.
go through a first and second reading, 13 days apart. Unless it was adopted as an emergency. But I don't really be, I don't know that there would be a sound basis to adopt this ordinance as an emergency or amend this ordinance under that authority.
Right. It feels very, it feels very odd that we would, consider removing 4 positions and not the commissioners because it's in the face of the legal, sort of subscription that we. or
Well, and we talked about the fact
prescription we've
too,
been
that
provided.
if you did amend the ordinance to remove the other elected offices and retain the ordinance, but have it apply only to commissioners, that's where we have the clearest
Mhm.
opinion from the appellate court that it is unconstitutional. So you're still left with the question, if you leave it as is, if you amend it to remove some and still apply to others, what then might the decision of the board be in the event that you faced a challenge? Would you still then be interested in defending that ordinance in its
Knowing.
amended capacity?
Right.
Knowing that
Knowing that we have a opinion that has found a very similar ordinance already to be unconstitutional.
And then
Commissioner-
Chair, I know that you asked a specific question, and I think we're kind of moving around perhaps off of that question. And so with your blessing, I'm going to ask a question that's a little bit off as well, but you referred to it. So I wanted to make sure that we got it answered, which is what would be the cost, or would there be an incurred cost in referring this to the ballot? And my understanding is this would, if the timing worked out, this could go to voters in the fall at the regularly scheduled election time. Christian, Ken, Colton, do you know if there would be a cost given that timing?
So if we were to add something to the ballot this fall, we would share in the cost along with every other item that's on the ballot. There are a lot of issues and matters on the general election ballot for the fall. So in my discussions with the clerk, our cost would be relatively small. I don't know that we have an exact number, but it certainly would be less than if, for example, there were only one or two other items, or if there was, say, a special election. So the cost for this, for our participation in this fall election would be much smaller given the other items that are already on the ballot.
Chair, given that if we refer to the voters, which I think is a good idea, but they've already expressed their opinion on numerous occasions, is it not just sort of window dressing in that regardless of the outcome of the vote, ultimately, if an elected challenged it, it would just sort of be theater? Because at the end of the day, we've got precedent, legal precedent that says you cannot uphold this term limit.
Right, and I think the ballot question matters, right? It's not, do you support term limits for assessor, clerk, treasurer, or sheriff? It's, considering the legal issues with this particular ordinance, would you continue to support this? I don't know. It's a different question.
Yeah, and I would say, Chair, that would be my preferred question, is the second one, which is given the legal framework we have, given the language in the Constitution, do you say yes to repealing this because it is X reasons unconstitutional or illegal? I'm sorry I didn't jump in. I just wanted to make sure that I got that out there, that would be the question that the three of us would be presenting to the voters in my proposal. And obviously it's going to need to be worked out, but
And just
sorry,
so
Christian was about to say something.
the referral would be from the Board of Commissioners to ask, basically to put the repeal of the ordinance on the ballot. Right? Is that?
Well, that's what I'm worried about, is technically, I think it has to be the action we would take. So the action is we would be removing.
Should
the
it
four
be
positions.
repealed? Would be the question I think you would be asking voters, or not. Maybe I'm not.
That's the proposal that I was putting out there, is repeal the ordinance.
Right.
Okay, well, I just don't see how that's helpful, because anytime you loop in the commissioners to the discussion, as we've seen in public testimony, it's going to be no. I mean, we are highly political positions. We're not considered technical positions. I just don't see how that solves any problem, any issue, in terms.
And Chair, I guess from my perspective, we're at the question of two things, right? Is it was presented to us as a technical experts that we don't want to lose, but as you know, the question, the issue that has arisen is one of is it constitutional to have these positions have term limits? I think that our staff are indicating pretty clearly that for those array, which includes some of those, it isn't constitutional. And the three of us then, in my view of how I would propose and go forward with this, is that the three of us, none of whom are on the ballot in the fall, so that's helpful, are arguing that this demands to be repealed. And that's just my proposal, that obviously we don't need to go with that.
But we can't say that it's unconstitutional for the other four positions to have term limits, right? Because we don't technically have an opinion on that.
I think there were two, right? There were questions about the two positions, the assessor and the sheriff, not the other two.
So it's pretty clear from the court's reasoning that the treasurer and the clerk would also be unconstitutional term limits. With regard to the assessor and the sheriff, which are mentioned under Section 8, Article 6, Section 8 of the Constitution as positions that can have other qualifications prescribed by law. The question is, does prescribed by law include local qualifications? Can we impose local qualifications?
Mhm.
And it's unclear if it can be read that way, or if it's only meant to be state qualifications that we have. The sheriff mentioned having what was the term, being certifiable?
Certifiable. Okay.
And just to add to that too, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Colton, the research that we've done suggests that it should be at the state level, not at the local level. So there is that added challenge. Potentially,
I'd say it's unclear to leaning against us so far. We haven't found anything to support the idea of
Yeah.
local
Yeah.
research.
and what we have seen suggests state law, not local law. But yeah, as to those two offices called out in Article 6, Section 8.
Well, I'm not opposed to a public vote. I just don't have any interest in removing commissioner term limits. It's just not something that I ever would have taken up or considered, or I don't feel it's appropriate for myself. I just, so, you know, if we're talking about a public vote.
So
it's-
the public vote that Commissioner Kula was recommending would be a referral by the board to the voters to repeal the entire ordinance. If what I'm hearing you say is you aren't interested in a repeal of the entire ordinance, or you're not comfortable with removing commissioners from the ordinance, then you could either by board action or by a referral to the voters, amend the ordinance so that it would still apply to commissioners and just remove the other 4 positions.
So so we could remove the other positions by board action,
Correct.
leave the commissioners covered by 587
Correct.
and call it good.
In the same way that you remove the surveyor.
Right. And that would seem to be the easiest, the most, I don't know, the most direct way to get where we want to get. However, then again, if there are, folks who are opposed to a sheriff or an assessor or a clerk or a treasurer being able to run after 3 terms, there's that piece. But I guess my own personal opinion is we have highly qualified individuals who've been serving. Love to be able to see them continue in that service. And I also think that it is theater to put this on the ballot, knowing that what we're asking people to do is to ignore the statutes. So really, I have no interest in keeping commissioners, putting commissioners in that bucket of highly technical. But I do think that I would love to see them be able to run again.
And Chair, I have a question to clarify. Commissioner Sterritt, can you explain the ordinance that you the statute you're referring to and the political theater? I'm not following, I'm sorry.
Oh, what I'm saying is if we were to refer a repeal of ordinance 587 to the voters, knowing that if they were to come back saying, we'd like to retain term limits on these offices, that it would not pass legal muster. We know that because we have legal precedents that shows us at the circuit court and the appellate court. So really, it is political theater in that we know that ultimately, if one of our electeds wanted to challenge 587 when they went to file, that we would be engaged in a legal battle that we would likely lose.
Oh, I see. So you're saying that if the ordinance is not repealed by a majority vote of voters, that's in that instance, you're future casting, right?
No, I'm saying if, and that is predicated on, should this come back where the voters reaffirm what they've already said in the past, we're basically, we know that ultimately we have precedents that this would not stand legally, right, Kristen?
At least on 4 of the positions, with a question remaining on the assessor and the sheriff.
Right. Okay. Thank you. So
And-
yes.
And then to that end, Chair, oh my gosh, sorry. Forgive me, Commissioner Starrett, I had a question and it was gone in the midst of all that. But this is under the situation where a referral to the voters doesn't pass. And you have referred a number of times to the voters have voted in the past on this very issue, I think twice. Can you remind me, Christian perhaps, or Colton, when was the last time that this question went before voters? Like actually went before them?
To remove certain offices. From-
The question of term limits, I think in general, is probably more to Commissioner Starrett's point.
It was February 2000.
February of 2000. Okay. That was
2000 primary election, excuse me.
okay. I would just note that was half of my life ago. And I'm not that old, but I just mean that to say that there's different people, the population is different. This question may come down differently.
So as a reminder, what was the question, what was being asked on the ballot in 2000?
To limit the application of the ordinance to just commissioners and to remove the other elected offices.
Okay, so same exact thing we're discussing.
Mhm.
Oh, except that Chair, this is the question that I have proposed that we submit before voters is actually a repeal of the ordinance, not only having it apply to certain.
Not an amendment to remove, but a
Yeah.
repeal of the entire ordinance, right?
So if let's say we decide to vote to amend the ordinance and we remove the 4 technical positions, is there a process or a recourse for voters to respond to that if they're not happy with us for doing that?
So if you're talking about voters writ large at a later time after the board action, yes, they could always bring the matter back up through an initiative petition if they disagreed with the decision that the board made. There would also be a process for the citizens to provide you with additional feedback and comment at either the first or the second reading of the proposed amendment.
And there's always a referendum.
Yeah.
Following the passage of the ordinance amending 587, that the voters could seek
I think that's what I think
sorry.
initiative petition referendum,
Sure.
same concept.
So
think,
voter
unless you-
initiated referendum
Correct,
process.
to
on the amendment.
then amend the ordinance again to put those offices back into the ordinance.
It seems,
Or the question could be raised with the courts and could be challenged that way as well, right? You know.
Right.
Yes, at some
yeah.
point, sure. But again,
Right.
I'm trying to be as clear as we can about something that I admit is not crystal. But we do have a very clear opinion from the Court of Appeals on at least 4 of the positions in the ordinance. Maybe commissioners, clerks, and treasurers. 3.
Treasure.
And it's the assessors and the sheriff that would be a question that could potentially be worth asking the local court to weigh in on. But
The
again,
way I see it happening would be we adopt a ordinance that amends 587, amends however many positions out of the term limits language. After the passage of that ordinance, there's a window of time for voters to file for a referendum to basically nullify the effect of that ordinance, and it
There's
would
that
go
too.
into a ballot measure. So that's how I would see it happening. But of course, we could be sued by somebody also for the newly challenging the newly enacted ordinance. So those are the 2 ways.
so yeah, there are options for voters if they disagree with the decision the board makes.
Sounds like not a lot of exciting options. Well, so Commissioner Kula, it's my understanding that your overarching position is let's refer the entire ordinance out to the voters to repeal the entire, or ask them to repeal the entire thing.
Correct. Yeah. And then and part of that to me, Chair, is just as Commissioner Starrett so eloquently put, this is a political process. And it takes our deciding on our own fates out of it, and puts the whole thing before them in a way that I think is strongly defensible. Like, we can create very strong arguments for this repeal and when we put it on the ballot.
Thank you. Well, we don't have to make a decision today, so I don't want to just push us into that. But I think the part I'm struggling with is, if we're going to put on the ballot a question of should we repeal term limits for everyone in Yamaha County, which is essentially what you're saying. We've already heard from voters. We've heard from them, as soon as last night, not year 2000, right? We know that a lot of them are very passionate about, especially commissioners having term limits. I don't necessarily disagree with them. But a lot of the nuances of what comes out of a ballot title, a ballot question, all of that, the arguments is, it absolutely could sway a voter either way, when really what we're talking about is the legality of the ordinance. We're not arguing about the policy of the term limits. That's why it was brought forward, is the legal issue as to what this ordinance is based on. And so I still feel like it would be nice to hear from the courts, at least on a couple of the positions.
If the consensus of the board is that you believe term limits for those two positions are still something that the board is interested in maintaining. If you have other policy reasons why you think it would be appropriate to remove the assessor and the sheriff and the clerk and the treasurer from the ordinance, then I don't believe you would gain much by going through that process. But if you do believe that those are positions that you would support term limits for, then there could be some merit in asking the court for a decision.
Right. And we have no precedent as to whether a home rule county can do term limits legally, whether
term limits for those positions or term limits generally. I don't think
For
we have
anyone.
a decision on the constitutionality of a home rule county term limits local law. We've talked a little bit about this previously. There is language in the Constitution that suggests under constitutional home rule authority, they would be in a much stronger position when it comes to adding additional qualifications to elective office. So I think it's likely that a challenge to a home rule term limits law might fail.
Okay.
I just lost the rest of my chain of thought. But as far as general law counties like Campbell County, we do have the Court of Appeals decision on a very similar ordinance, which placed essentially the same added qualifications on the office of county commissioner as our ordinance does. So again, I keep kind of going back to that distinction, but I think it's an important one when the board is considering what to do next. If you do believe that there is merit in there being and maintaining term limits on the offices of assessor and sheriff, then there could be some worth to asking the court for its opinion. If for other policy reasons you've determined that for the reasons that the assessor and the sheriff have brought before you and the other electeds as well, that there are other reasons, other good policy reasons why those positions should no longer be in the ordinance, then I don't know that that would be a worthwhile process to go through.
But I wonder if we, this is just a hypothetical, I wonder if we were to split it up into steps. The way I see this is there are two issues. The first issue is legality of term limits in general on county positions. The second is this concern about the administrative impact of forcing experienced individuals out of office. If you were to make a decision to repeal the administrative positions out of the ordinance through just board action, a couple of hearings, et cetera, that would leave you with 587 only having term limits for commissioners. Christian, what if at that point we sought judicial review of 587 as amended and asked, is this remaining ordinance constitutional? The benefit, I suppose, would be that the court likely would find that the amended ordinance 587 as amended is unconstitutional because it's almost identical to the one in Douglas County, and the outcome of that case would be binding on the county, and so the remaining ordinance would be struck from the books. And so it would be the court doing the work for us and repealing it in a sense rather than us. And of course, that might help because it's such a highly political, controversial topic.
Maybe, yeah, but I think the end result of that would be essentially where we are today. We know where the court has weighed in on the constitutionality of term limits in a general law county as applies to commissioners. And not to say that there might not be some merit in going through that process, but as I said before, I wouldn't expect the outcome to be different. And I think Colton would agree with me. But I guess it could serve the purpose of there being a local decision from one of our circuit court judges but that would be an odd way for us to ask the court to weigh in, right? Generally, we would, as we did, I remember, a little over a year and a half ago, we asked the court to uphold a board action that was undertaken by the Board of Commissioners. Here, we'd be essentially, I'm not sure what we would be doing, whether we would be asking the court to uphold an ordinance that we have an appellate court decision striking down, or would we be asking them essentially to issue a similar opinion to the Court of Appeals? I don't know. To me, as far as a legal process, I don't know that it would be worthwhile, I guess.
The only thing I would
In the hypothetical that you
right, and the only
presented.
point I just want to make clear is that when we're asking the court for their opinion, it's not like they're writing us an opinion and we say, oh, that's nice, we'll take it into consideration. It will be whatever they decide in terms of the validity of our ordinance will be binding to the ordinance, and so we'll have to. So anyway, that would be my point, is that there would be some outcome of doing it, and we can have an idea of what that outcome would be based on the hit case.
So that's my question is, so I don't think that was an ordinance that we asked about last year.
That OSHA.
It was just a
an
board
order,
action, right?
board order.
Mhm.
So whatever came out of the courts was not, we're ordering you to, it was
No.
something else. It was,
Well, it was basically what it would do is give an affirmative defense to anyone who'd been cited by OSHA
That's
to
right.
go before Yamhill County judge, that we were basically going to provide cover. And they denied the validity of that affirmative defense.
Yeah, it would have been a good faith affirmative defense.
Okay.
If they could demonstrate that they had tried to follow some of the other restrictions and limitations, and the court found that to be in conflict with state law.
so, but in this case, we're asking about an ordinance. And so there would be some type of statement or order or something that comes out of that we would have to react to. just like in Douglas County, it sounds like they had to react to the court's opinion.
I would have to go back and look. It's a process under ORS 33.710. And I'm trying to remember exactly what we got out of the court when we did this last time. But it was a opinion of the court that the board action was in conflict with state law. I don't believe that the board took any further action after that to repeal the board action.
Well, I guess it would depend on what judgment came from the judge. I guess the judge would be the one to decide what that judgment looks like. But
Okay.
it does say here that whatever judgment is entered in the proceeding is binding upon all the parties. So if their judgment was to say it's unconstitutional, it has to be declared null and void, that would be the outcome.
The flip side of the question too is, do you want to ask the court that question? Right? Because Mr. Burchard, I think you've suggested that you are not necessarily in favor of striking down term limits on commissioners. By asking the court that, we might not get the answer that you like. So there would be that potential outcome as well.
Well, I mean, it's pretty clear when you read the Height case that it's unconstitutional. I'm not arguing with that. I just don't, it doesn't seem like there's political will of this board to do anything. So and I don't, I see it both ways. Term limits are every 4 years for us in some ways, but I can understand the insurance of having 3 terms. So Douglas County, though, they removed term limits for the sheriff and whatever their assessor tax collector.
It only applied to their
Right.
commissioners.
I think that's right.
And yeah, apparently you found the ordinance on their website, but what I hear from their county council is that they do not have term limits anymore.
Okay, so nobody has them. Okay.
So, yeah, so the ordinance only applied to commissioners and it was found to be invalid. So
It may
I
still
don't
be
know.
on their books, but they may simply take the position that it is
Right.
something that they would enforce if it was ever challenged again.
Right.
I'd have to
Okay.
look at the judgment in that case to be sure.
I don't like that we're putting certain elected officials in a position where we're basically saying that even though we have legal precedent, you're going to have to sue us and sort of be the bad guy, if you will, for us to act on this. That doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel responsible.
We don't have to defend it.
No.
If one of our electeds chooses to challenge the ordinance, we don't have to defend it, and we could basically it could just be allowed.
In that, so are you describing a scenario where the board took no action
Mhm.
on the current ordinance and left it in place?
Mhm.
So if it played out similar to the way it did in Douglas County, the elected official would approach the clerk at the time they wanted to refile for a term beyond their third, and the clerk would deny them the opportunity to register based on the ordinance. And then if the clerk continued to deny them, then they could file, a writ in circuit court. If at that time the instruction of the clerk was, don't deny them, go ahead and let them register, then I think the issue would be resolved, and we simply wouldn't be enforcing the ordinance.
Right, and it wouldn't incur any legal fees, and we wouldn't have taken any action. And at this point, zero sum game.
It would be an acknowledgement that the county was not intending to enforce the ordinance.
Saves
So-
us the sort of the circuitous process of putting it on the ballot, knowing it would never stand up in court. There's an expense there. There's a just sort of disingenuous, I think, because even though, we just know what the outcome would be. So this way, if somebody truly wants to challenge it, then they can go ahead and do it, just like Commissioner Morgan did in Douglas County. Without the court.
If the board took no action and left the ordinance on, left it in place as it is, that's right, then you would be, yes, putting those elected officials in the position of having to decide whether or not they wanted to challenge it,
Knowing there wasn't going to be a challenge,
knowing there wasn't going to be a
a
defense.
defense, right?
So we can simply
If
direct our
that's- if
county
that's- if
clerk.
that- I'm sorry. I was just going to say, if that's the position of the board, why wouldn't you just amend the ordinance to remove its applicability to those offices?
Because it doesn't, I mean, it doesn't pass muster according to the Oregon Constitution, so
But you could amend the ordinance as requested, retain its applicability to commissioners, but remove its applicability to those other elected officers. Then you wouldn't be putting them in the position of having to challenge it because it would no longer apply to them.
sure, I would be in favor of that.
So this feels a little awkward because we're having somewhat of a legal
Which is fine.
discussion in
We can-
public,
as
but
much
that's,
as- yeah,
which
as-
is what we want to do, but I'm just
Yeah.
saying it feels a little,
If the board has
Clunky.
specific, if you do have specific legal questions that you'd like to ask us, depending on the question and the context, it's possible we could go into an executive session, but we've talked about this before. And I agree. I believe this was the conversation that the board wanted to have in open session.
I think it's important for people to hear
Mhm.
the details and the
Mhm.
minutia of the decision and why you arrive at something.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't know that I like just sort of telling the clerk not to enforce the ordinance without an official action, because you're putting the clerk in a pretty,
Yeah,
Tough spot.
I see that, and that seems a little bit unusual. I suppose at that point, if the board wanted to, they could take some formal action to amend the ordinance at that time. If you sort of wait to see if a challenge comes, and then if the challenge comes, amend the ordinance then to remove it so that it doesn't impact the individual who's choosing to run.
And that looms heavy over an elected who has 2 years left in his term, knowing that you've got to fight it, or you've got the ill will and the court of public opinion, when all you want to do is be able to continue to do your job.
Agreed.
So forgive me, I'm gonna jump in now. Are we discussing this as a simple repeal of the ordinance by lack of inaction, or are we discussing repealing the ordinance by simply directing another elected official to not enforce an ordinance?
So the only way it would be repealed is if the board repealed it, or it was referred to the voters and the voters repealed it. Otherwise, it would be a ordinance that the board would simply be choosing not to enforce. So it's not a repeal in the latter sense. It's simply a decision by the governing body not to enforce its ordinance, which seems odd, but that's kind of, I
Also-
think, where it would be.
I'm a little unclear on whether the clerk could choose not to enforce certain laws, or if they have a duty to enforce state and local law. And I mean, is that something we can ask of the clerk? And I just don't have the experience. And Ken, maybe can we ask department heads to not enforce local law?
We've done that.
yes, we
the
have.
clerk-
Wait, we have?
The clerk's a little bit different than, kind of the question about the department heads, and what I would probably do is, that would be a question for Brian. Sorry, that's me.
It's a
funding-
state position. It's a state elections officer. Okay.
But they're interpreting, and they would be applying a county ordinance, right? So the clerk's decision wouldn't be based on any state law or any rules or regulations that apply specifically to the processes of their office. They would simply be applying a county ordinance that is still in effect, rather than advising the clerk not to enforce it. To me, it would seem to make more sort of logical sense if the board didn't want to prevent that elected official from running for office again, to remove them at that time from the application of the ordinance. And so if the sheriff or the assessor file and the commissioners are not interested in preventing them from running, you could at that time amend the ordinance to remove its application to that office, much like you could do today. You could wait until they challenge it and then amend it. Or if you agree that you no longer support term limits on those offices, remove them from the application of the ordinance now.
Just those offices.
It's up to the board, yes. You could remove all four, you could remove one or more.
Yeah.
The request that's come forward has been from the clerk, the treasurer, the sheriff, and the assessor to have those four offices removed.
I think the buck stops with us. I don't think it's very appropriate for us to just simply say, well, we're not going to enforce this. And so clerk, you need to fall in line. It doesn't feel very fair to do that. So,
I would agree.
well, we have some differing opinions. Commissioner Cool is smiling. Do we want to take another week and sort of formulate what we would be willing to do, and then discuss and be prepared to make a decision at that time? Or are we ready now?
Chair, I'm thinking about with the timing of other agenda items that we have over the next few days, or next few weeks. My recommendation would be that we come to the June 30th meeting prepared to take action of some kind. And I'm just thinking about in terms of the things that we have going on over the next few weeks.
Okay. Commissioner Starrett, thoughts on that?
And what was the date, Commissioner Kula?
June.
Oh, June 30th. We have budget adoption that day. And forgive me for not knowing, Ken, what else we have that day. But I know that we have some significance of.
Budget adoption is my main thing.
Okay.
So that's the one that comes to the forefront. And then the question, for the agenda, this is going to be a continued discussion that we can have under other business, that there's no actionable item that's on the agenda. It's just going to be continued discussion, and it's not intended to be another hearing, even though anyone is welcome to continue to provide comment. It'll be on the agenda, but it's not a hearing. And then depending on what action the board decides to take on the 30th, will kind of dictate the next step in the process.
Unless the board wanted to reschedule another hearing and give folks another opportunity on the 30th to comment.
But they can still comment if it's on an agenda
Sure,
item.
they can do that too. Yeah,
And
but if
still
you were
receive
interested
that
in
via public comment.
if you were interested in scheduling another public hearing, you could do that as well.
Because recognizing that any modification to the ordinance with the, if it's not being declared an emergency and there's going to be two readings, that's essentially.
If ultimately
a
the
hearing.
decision is to amend the
Right.
ordinance in some capacity or repeal it entirely, if that's a decision of the board,
Right.
then we would have a first and second reading. If the decision is to refer the question to the voters, then we would prepare the documents for the board to take that action.
Okay. And when's the deadline for that? Do we know?
I think it's August.
August.
So I
August,
believe
okay.
June, sometime in August. So June 30th would still provide time if the decision was to refer a question to the voters on November's ballot. There is still time.
Okay.
Obviously there's less time than there would be today, but there is still time. And I think it would be sufficient time to get all that taken care of.
Okay.
Okay. Commissioner Kula, I think June 30th sounds good in terms of being prepared to make a decision either way.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so we are now moving on to announcements. I just wanted to acknowledge our graduating seniors this weekend. This weekend's grad weekend. So congratulations to all of our grads. And they've been through a lot with COVID, a lot of trials. And so we're very proud of them. I attended the Amity senior scholarship ceremonies on Monday night, and then the Yamaha Carlton ones last night. And so congratulations again to Madison Bigman, Cadence Berkner, and Cheyenne Kelly, who received $1,000 scholarships from the county
partly from the county for the Fair Ambassador Awards. And they will be coming in front of us on July 14th to do some public speaking practice and that kind of thing. And then also we had the Tillamook Working Lands Tour on Sunday and Monday. That was extremely informative. There were several commissioners there, some from Eastern Oregon. Senator Markley's office was there, and then some others. And just a wonderful tour of the fish hatchery and Stinson forest land, and talking about the ecosystem there. And then we ended with a tour of the dairy farm, and the owner of the dairy farm was quite outspoken about his frustration with the current economy, definitely feeling the pinch, even though Tillamook, the creamery, apparently pays the most for dairy products, incoming dairy products. So we're blessed to have them, but he was just beside himself about the cost of inputs. The cost of feed has gone up 50% in 2 years, cost of diesel, and they're really, really struggling to make ends meet at this point, and trying to keep that business in the family. So it was a great, very informative tour. So if you haven't done it, I highly encourage next year. I think they do it every year through the Tillamook Working Lands group. So that's all I have for announcements. Commissioners?
I have nothing, Commissioner.
Okay.
I have just a few, Chair. One is that Red Hills Road and Highway 240, as you all know, keeps coming up as an area that needs to be safer. And Commissioner Starrett, I know that you communicated with ODOT staff, because I got emails from them saying, here's what we communicated with your colleague on. And those were a lot of the things that ODOT believed to be sufficient were signage. And so talking with our Road Improvement Advisory Committee members, the discussion was perhaps it's time to seek external funding for actually working on this road, this highway, that ODOT is not able to, funding wise, to actually do the safety improvements of this intersection. So there's a program through the infrastructure bill called Safe Roads for All, that I'm going to be talking with Road Improvement Advisory Committee, checking in with Public Works staff about seeking funding through that, which basically allows counties and cities to do work on ODOT highways, obviously in coordination with them, but to really make things safer for the long term. So stay tuned. I'll try to keep you informed. Obviously, if anything comes of it from Public Works, it'll come before you as multiple agenda items over the next few months. So with that, I will say that the only other thing is that I apologize I was not able to make it to the Tillamook Working Lands Tour because I had previously agreed to teach 5th graders edible native plants. So there's a lot of people out there who now know that they can eat nettles raw, for better or worse.
Stinging nettles?
Oh yeah.
Really? Oh.
We'll do a tour too.
Jeez. I was going to ask about Parkway. Did Parkway meet this morning?
Right.
Yes, so Parkway met this morning. We did not, we ended up with just a more comprehensive overview and update from ODOT project managers about the bypass in its various phases. Deliberations and a kind of setting a position of Parkway with regards to the 3-mile lane plan was delayed because we had a very productive conversation, Brett Baker, Dave Hageberg, and I, with Heather Richards from the city of McMinnville. City of McMinnville and staff and city councilors are going to continue to discuss it. It sounds like there may even be a place for McMinnville Industrial Promotions in there about how to get the goals achieved of the city and of industrial partners, while still making sure that the highway for the long term is essentially an expressway, or as much of an expressway as we can maintain.
Okay,
And so there will be an opportunity for us to provide a position, but it's going to be delayed a little bit.
okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Commissioner Sherritt, did you have? a
Well, I
thought?
was just gonna, just to comment on what Commissioner Kula said about ODOT, when you bring them a concern and they say, hey, listen, we've done this and this and this is, it's all been taken care of, when we know that constituents who live along those roads have significant concerns that are not being addressed. So it is a bit of a frustration when they said, it's all good, and we say, no, the problem still exists. So glad there's a vehicle. So
It feels a little bit funny, Commissioner, to be like, well, the federal government has money for us to do the work on your highway, but that's the reality, is that
Yeah.
that's part of the reason why they have that fund, is so that locals who know the problems can take matters into their own hands in partnership.
Thanks.
agreed. Thank you, Commissioner.
Ken, I think you have a big announcement, right, from this morning? ARPA?
Oh, yeah, I shared the information that we did receive our second tranche of funding, so.
Yay. The money's in the bank.
Money's in the
That's-
bank.
That sounds good. Okay, any other announcements? No? Okay, well, if there's nothing else for the good of the order, I will adjourn the Yamaha County Board of Commissioner formal and informal session for June 9th. It is 12:06.